Let's take a closer look at growing cilantro. This footage was taken out of my personal gardens over the last 3 years, and so I'd like to show you a few things that I've learned about growing cilantro. We're going to take a closer look at how and when to plant it, how to water and feed it, some of the diseases and problems you may experience, how to harvest the leaves, seeds, and root, and how to store it and use it in your kitchen. Cilantro is a cool season herb, and so I always like to have this in my container garden. I usually start these seeds outdoors about 4 weeks before my last frost date. Here is some cilantro that's growing that I directly sowed into my container. Cilantro does best when you put the seed directly into the soil versus transplanting it. So in the U.S., we commonly refer to this plant as cilantro and the dried seeds as coriander. In other parts of the world, you may also hear this plant being referred to as coriander, that would be for the green leaves and the seed, or as Chinese parsley. So the type of cilantro that I like to grow is called slow bulb. I found that it works well for me. When your soil temperatures are between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, that is when your seed will germinate. If you're trying to plant your seed when the temperatures are cooler than that, you may not notice the seeds will germinate until the soil has reached at least 50 degrees. If you plan to grow this in a container, you'll want to make sure that your pot is at least 8 inches deep. The cilantro does grow a nice long taproot down through the center, and it does need some room to grow. Sow your seeds about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep, and your soil needs to be very well draining. Make sure to always mark your plants if you're new to gardening so that you know that you have already put seeds there and you won't plant over it. Also, this will help you become familiar with your plants and what they look like when they germinate. Here is an example where I'm planting green bunching onion seeds along with cilantro seeds in a container. These are two herbs I love to use together in most of my dishes. So this is on June 5th, and I'd like to give you an example of the growth and what you can expect during some of the warmer months. In June, the temperatures where I live usually hover around 85 degrees. So once your seeds come up, you'll want to go ahead and thin your seedlings. And what this means is that usually when you plant seeds, sometimes two will come up right next to each other. It's important to go ahead and cut out one of those versus pulling it out, because when you pull it out, sometimes you can disturb the root system that's developing on the other seedling. So cut it out. You want to make sure that your plants are spaced at least 4 inches apart so that they will receive adequate air circulation while they're becoming established. Air circulation will help prevent disease on the cilantro plant. So as I mentioned earlier, cilantro is a cool season plant. So in my container garden, I have a tree, and I like to put my cilantro and the green onion underneath the tree so that it receives a little bit of shade during the hottest time of the day. Now let's head down to the garden where I'd like to show you how I plant these directly into the ground. I always take a little bucket of water with me in a child's watering can whenever I sow seeds directly into the garden. This is some seed that I saved the previous growing season, and all I'm going to do is just take this off here and scatter it out onto the soil. I'm not near as structured when it comes to planting in my ground as I am in my raised beds in my container garden. So I'll just cover this lightly with soil. I've already amended the soil with some rich compost, so I'm just going to water them in and give them a marker. So let's take a look at how to water and feed your cilantro. This is an example of the cilantro that has reseeded in my garden. Cilantro oftentimes will just reseed for me naturally, and I don't have to plant it. I always like to do an additional planting just to make sure I get it, which is what I just showed you earlier. But here is an example where it has reseeded. So when I see that it's coming up, this is in early April, I will go ahead and begin to side dress it with some compost. Just a couple of weeks later, it's grown into a nice plant where at this time I can go ahead and really start harvesting the leaves. This is an example of probably a total of about 4 weeks growth. So whenever I plant seeds, I always like to use a spray end of a watering can, and this is so that it kind of mimics what would naturally happen in nature. It doesn't force the seeds too far down into the soil. When the plant matures, I like to use a different kind of watering can, and this is so that I can water at the base of the plant. I always like to water at the base of my plants, especially during the hot and humid months of the growing season. I water early in the morning so that if I do get water on the plant leaves, that it will evaporate. We'll discuss problems that you can have from improperly watering your cilantro later in the video. You can also use a water-soluble fertilizer at this time too to feed your plants. Just follow the instructions for the fertilizer that you plan to use. I have read that too much nitrogen can make your cilantro have an off flavor. I've not experienced myself, but I typically will feed my container garden with a nitrogen water-soluble fertilizer about once every 10 days. Now let's take a look at some of the problems you may have when growing cilantro. Once temperatures start to heat up wherever you live, you will notice that your cilantro will start to grow a thick stem in the middle, and this is known as bolting. The heat will make the cilantro grow quickly up through the center and produce a flower where it's attempting to produce seed. Here's an example of the green onions and the cilantro that I planted early in June. You'll notice that I'm planting these during the hot months. The cilantro is a bit leggy, however I can still use the cilantro fine. The way I like to grow cilantro during the hot summer months is to plant it about every 2 to 3 weeks. You'll notice that when I was watering in the seeds that I had planted, off to the right there was another container where I had also planted cilantro about 2 weeks earlier. Here's an example where I planted seeds at different times. I have some in here that I planted about 2 weeks ago. And then this one here was planted about 4 weeks ago, and this one here was planted about 6 weeks ago in the summer. You'll notice this is going to seed. It's bolted up through the center. So at this stage of growth, the cilantro plant is really not good for using in your recipes. So I'd like to give you some more examples on how I plant my cilantro every 2 to 3 weeks during the hot summer months. Here is my other garden. It's a small square foot garden that I visit in the summer. And I did a really good video on this if you are interested in making a small garden. I'll leave a link there for you so that you can check that out. If you do look at that video, you can pause it and watch it later, okay? So here is an area where I planted cilantro. Here I'm thinning out my seeds. I planted these about 7 days earlier. And off to the right, I have some cilantro that I planted 2 weeks before I did that planting. So that was about a 3-week growth for me there. I've not had many problems growing cilantro where I live. However, if you live somewhere where it's hot and humid, you're going to have more of a problem with these issues here and the bolting, okay? So I want to show these to you so you can identify them. We have on the left here a leaf spot, and then on the right powdery mildew. Powdery mildew basically just looks like a dusting of powder on your herbs or vegetables. This can be prevented, or maybe not completely prevented, it depends on your climate, by keeping water off of your leaves. Again, make sure that you're watering at the base of your plants. This is also going to help prevent leaf spot. Make sure that you are thinning your seeds so that you are allowing air circulation to your plants, okay? Air circulation is going to help those plants dry out if you have rainfall or anything like that, especially during those hot summer months. I've not ever had a problem with insects on my cilantro. So just to recap, for a healthy and continuous supply of cilantro and coriander leaves, you'll want to plant your cilantro about once a month in the cool seasons, and then every 2 to 3 weeks when the temperatures start to heat up. Water at the base of the plant and not on the leaves, and then make sure that you're spacing your plants about 4 inches apart to allow for air circulation. Cilantro is most often grown for the leaves, so I want to show you how we can harvest those, store them, and some recipe ideas. During the cool season, I am pretty aggressive with harvesting the cilantro. You should be able to get anywhere from 2 to 3 harvests by cutting down almost the entire plant. I usually will leave a little bit, probably about 20% of the plant behind. But during the summer months, I'm not as aggressive with my cutting because I know that it's probably going to go to seed pretty soon. That's why I plant it every 2 to 3 weeks. Now, once your cilantro has bolted, if you let it get to that stage, at the base of your plants, you may still have some mature leaves. These have wonderful flavor and they're still fine to use in recipes. Usually I have already picked all of those, but sometimes I can find a few at the base of my plants. The ones that you do not want to use are the ones that have turned like a little fern. They become very thin and almost feathery. These are not good to use in recipes and they have an off flavor. So once I've harvested my cilantro, I like to give it a good wash and I'll dry it very good in my salad spinner. There are a lot of different ways that people store their cilantro. Sometimes they'll just take it and put it right in a freezer bag in the freezer. I think that would be fine. I'm going to show you how I like to store mine. So I like to remove my leaves from the stalks of the cilantro plant. I don't always use this stalk because it can be a little bit tough, but they're great in a good stalk. So now I'm just going to take my very dry leaves and I'm going to wrap those in a paper towel and put those in my produce drawer. I'll just give you an example here of how these leaves looked about 3 weeks later. They're a little bit wilted, but there is no browning, they're not slimy, and they are still full of flavor. Some people like to put their cilantro in a jar of water and then store it in the refrigerator. If you do it this way, just trim your stems first because they could be a little bit dried out since you harvested it, and then just go ahead and put those in your refrigerator. I tend not to store it this way. I have a small refrigerator and I found that just storing it in the produce drawer works fine for me. Some of the ways I like to use my fresh cilantro is in coconut milk soup, or in the summertime I love it with cucumber and corn. To remove my leaves, I just hold my knife at about a 45-degree angle and then just slide the leaves right off. This tough stalk will stay behind, removing only this thin and tender part of the cilantro. So this is another recipe I just love to make in the springtime, and it's chicken thighs with ginger and some fresh greens from the garden with the cilantro. It's just so good. And then when the summer months approach, I love to make a good pico de gallo. So I'll leave a link here to that recipe. If you'd like to check it out, you can click on this picture here. It'll open up the video in a new window and you can pause it and watch it later. I'd also like to invite you to head over to my channel page where you can click on playlist, and there are a lot of different recipes over there organized by the different types of vegetables and herbs you may be harvesting from your garden. Hopefully these will give you some good ideas of how you can use various herbs and vegetables in your kitchen. The roots of the cilantro plant are commonly used in some Asian dishes, so I want to show you how I like to harvest the root of the cilantro plant. When I notice that it's starting to bolt, in other words that center is getting very thick and is starting to shoot up leaves through the center, I'll go ahead and pull the plant at that time. For cooking, I like to use a nice young cilantro root. This one's almost a little bit too big. Here's an example where cilantro was bolting in one of my raised beds. The root was still very nice though. This was because the plant was not very old. You know how I mentioned that in the summer they will bolt quicker, so the roots were just perfect for cooking. So when you harvest your roots, you'll want to go ahead and clean those up. I have one little toothbrush that I use just for produce. I like to scrub clean from my gardens. I like to freeze my cilantro roots until I can use them with other things from my garden like lemongrass. Usually my lemongrass, I'll start to harvest it in about late July and August. And I like to make a nice curry paste with those ingredients. So this is an example of some paste that I made. I've included this recipe on my cilantro playlist. Many times in the U.S., if we say coriander, we're talking about the dried seeds of the cilantro plant. So I want to show you how we can harvest and store this wonderful spice. So when your cilantro goes to seed, that means it's going to produce a little flower, and it's absolutely beautiful in the garden. It glows, and I just love to let it go to seed. You will notice that the seeds will be green at first. So I have seen these green seeds available at farmers markets for sale. So I thought I would give them a try. I used it with lime, and that was not a good thing to do. So I'm not certain that I love the flavor yet, but just to tell you what it tastes like, it's an exact cross of the cilantro leaf and the dried coriander seed. I think I'm going to give that a try again here soon. Coriander seed is most often collected when it's turning tan, kind of going to a grayish color. So you can collect it right into the bowl if you feel like it's dry enough where you live. I have a pretty dry climate. Then I also like to just pull the entire plant sometimes because I want to dry it for coriander seed, and I also want to have seed for the following season so that I can plant it again. So I'll first just start by cleaning off the roots. I sometimes like to save the roots even at this stage. I don't use them to put in a dish, but I will also put these in a stock. It has a very strong flavor still, even at this point. And then I'll also rinse off the seeds, and I do this to remove any insects. This might not be something that you want to do if you live somewhere it is very humid, because the seeds may not dry out nicely. But I do like to give mine a rinse. That's up to you. So here's an example of the bottom of the roots after I rinse them off. I'll clean these better when I get inside my house. And so basically I just like to tie up my stems upside down in my garage out of direct sunlight for them to dry. And about 2 to 3 weeks later I can go ahead and cut them off, and I'll show you here how I like to clean them. If you feel like there are insects or insect eggs on your coriander seeds, you may want to freeze them first. I don't really need to do that. I basically just like to rub my coriander seed, and this will loosen up any debris off of the seeds, and then I'll just toss them back and forth from a paper plate or a piece of parchment paper. The seeds will roll off and the debris will stay behind on the parchment paper. You can store your seed in an airtight container in a cool, dark place. And when it comes time to use it, you'll want to just heat it up in a dry pan for just a couple of minutes until it starts to smell kind of nutty. And then you can grind it down in a spice grinder. And there you can use it however you like. I like to use it again in a curry paste. And it just depends on the time of year. That's usually where it ends up, in a curry paste. So here is my disclaimer. I am not responsible for what you eat, okay? You need to be familiar with the things that you're growing in your garden, and this is for new gardeners. I want to caution you on different plants of the carrot family. I showed you in my carrot growing video the carrot flower. We've looked today at the cilantro flower. I'll show you at some point the dill flower. And then down here in the right corner is the poisonous hemlock flower. This is a very deadly plant, and it can easily find its way into your garden. So I want to caution you on this plant, and I encourage you to educate yourself about it. I will leave you a link here on a news report where they talked about the poisonous plant and someone had been poisoned, and I encourage you to look at that very closely. And also you can read here some information about the toxic effects of eating the hemlock plant. The poisonous hemlock plant can be easily mistaken for many different plants in the carrot family. So just be very cautious. If you notice a stalk, green stalk growing in your garden that has purple splotching on it, that is oftentimes a very good way to identify the poison hemlock plant. Okay, so I don't want to leave it on a bad note here, but I do think this is very important for you to educate yourself whenever you're growing anything in your garden, especially if you're a new gardener. So I hope that you have learned a lot during this video. Most of all, I hope that you're able to grow cilantro successfully. And I'd like to invite you to head on over to my YouTube channel page where you can click on the little G there and follow me over there on Google+. I am only on Google+ and YouTube. I'm not out there on Pinterest or Facebook or all of that. So I like to share other things and updates, on different kind of projects I have going on in the garden, or it might be that I have a new recipe I'd like to share. So head on over there. You're welcome to follow me, and thank you so much for watching. Y'all have a beautiful day.